begin with you, Bruce. This film, Ladies in Black, is a long time coming. You must be relieved to finally see it on the screens.
It was, I first read the novel in the 1990s after it was published in England, written by Madeline St. John, who'd been at university with me. And I brought to Sue's attention and said this would make a great film, and I think Sue negotiated an option on it. And then I thought, well, everyone's going to love this book as much as we do, and it'll be sailed through and we'll make it. And I said to Madeline, who was quite ill, a frail little thing she was, I said, we'll make this before you die. But we didn't, because she went and let us down by dying a few years ago, I think about 8 years ago. So anyway, finally, thanks to Sue and Alana Zitzerman, the co-producer, they got the film together and we made it recently.
So why was it so difficult to get up?
Is this one working?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It's one of those things you just toss around. Nobody wanted it. Nobody could see the movie in it that Bruce and I could see at the time. People said it's such a slight story. Nothing happens in the story.
There's no explosions.
No, there's no explosions. There's no action. It's simply people, and it. I guess it was the times as well. I mean, the government agencies certainly didn't want to help, but we couldn't get distribution either. We had some cast lined up. We had Isabella Rossellini at one stage wanted to do it. Monica Bellucci wanted to do it. Still, we couldn't get anything. And
well, people at the film thing had never heard of either of them. Was one of the problems.
I guess it was partly the times as well. You know. Times have moved on. The musical, which was Ladies in Black, which was created...
That was 2015.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Yep.
It started in Brisbane, was a hit. That happened. Then there was the rise of the women's movement, the rejuvenation of the women's movement.
With the Me Too campaign.
Yeah, and immigration issues and so. Somehow... the water changed, you know, with things you can't really explain them half the time. It just got easier. And I must say, then we brought on Alana, who was really a dynamo at raising money, which I was a signal failure at with this film. And so between it swore, we were able to kind of get it going.
And Bruce, what was it about the story that you felt needed to be told on screen?
Well, there are a lot of things. I was very attracted to the humour of it. I thought that the characters were well drawn. There was an interesting variety. It was often, I thought, very funny. That was one of the problems we had too when we were trying to raise money. People kept telling us, they said, you think it's funny? It's not funny. I said, I think it's funny.
I've heard it described as a dramedy.
It's not really a drama at all. Slightly, perhaps, but more of a comedy. But I like the theme, but I like the positive approach it took to Australia. Madeline wrote the book when she was in England. She left Australia when she was in her early 20s and never came back. And I think she was looking at Australia really with loving eyes, having left the country. And she wrote this book, and I thought, it's so nice to make a film which shows Australia in such a positive light, full of wonderful people, which I think is actually true. But you get so many bitter, angry films. I thought, I'd like to make a cheerful film, and this is it. And I like, too, the theme of the migrants coming and being assimilated, the migrants having to cope with the Australians, who are the ones who are already there, and the Australians having to adjust to the migrant life. I thought that was a wonderful theme, and of course it's still current. And I thought she handled it very well, with a very light touch, which we also tried to do in the film. And it was just a lovely piece.
I think some of the critics, though, have felt that it might be too light a touch
well, they're wrong.
Around the migrant issue.
They've all got it wrong, the ones who say that.
Is that that's a director's prerogative,
yes.
isn't it?
Oh, well, I saw one critic wrote a review and said, what about the migrants who are living out in suburbs working on farms and things? Well, that's another story. This was about these people who were at David Jones, and it was a different group. You could make 100 films about migrant experiences in Australia.
But it's also a parable about tolerance, really, although told in a very sort of simple and sometimes deceptively simple way. There's simply people that you don't understand, you don't like, and you're afraid of, and so you you don't like them and you hold back from them. And the film shows that once you get to know people, they're just the same as everybody else, and there's good and bad in all sides. And I think that's the single most important message, if you like, of the film, but it's done in such a way, and hopefully you all feel that you walk out thinking, yeah, you've kind of realised something.
No, Sue's right. This was a key factor in it, and I thought that whole theme was absolutely crucial. If that hadn't been there, it wouldn't have bothered with it. If it had just with a series of jokes, thematically it was so interesting.
I felt also that it was about what we can actually benefit from our experience with migrants as well. So beyond, that they're good people, that there's actually a contribution that is made to our culture.
That's right. Well, you do see these people all changing. I mean, the girl changes, even her stuck in the mud father, who works in the printing factory. Bit of salami, has a glass of red wine, and at the final scene he says, well, with all these changes, he said, things aren't the same as they were.
This is your first Australian film for nearly a decade.
Yes.
I'm wondering, Sue, do you see this as more of an Australian story, or do you see that there is an international resonance to it?
Oh, I think the themes are universal. It couldn't be more Australian if it tried. But that's the same with all great drama, I think. The themes touch everybody, because we're all pretty much the same once you drill down a bit. And so I think that's the lovely thing about it, is that it's unapologetically Australian and lovingly Australian, but the themes can be related to by anybody.
Is there a plan for international release?
Well, we hope so. Sony,
Certainly hope so.
Yes, Sony, the distributor Sony, have bought the film for the world. It was an unusual deal for an Australian film. Usually you get a distributor to buy the Australian rights, and then you have to find sales agents who will pre-sell or sell off the rest of the world, territory by territory. In this case, Sony took the film for the world, and so they've got money to get back because they put that money into the film. So we're pretty sure that they'll be working to get it outside Australia, yeah.
Bruce, can we talk about the making of the film? How did you go about recreating Sydney circa 1959?
Well, we had a very good art department. And they had to do a lot of research and find out where, we had a couple of guys who went around Sydney finding parts of the city that looked like 1959. And then we also had to do, of course I remembered it well, that helped.
What's the Sydney of your youth, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Well, 59 was the year I went to university there. And we had some of the wide shots, like you see in the city, with the outside of the store, were done by a very clever digital team who put a lot of the material, put stuff from 1959 back. I mean, we had the basic building, which Mark Foy's department store, which is now a courtroom, but we used that, we dressed up the windows, and then a lot of things like trams were added digitally. But also, a lot of the tram stuff we filmed in a tram museum in Cronulla, south of Sydney.
Fabulous. And what about the printing press, which was a beautiful scene?
Oh, we were very lucky. One day I saw in the paper an ad. I didn't know what we were going to do because everything now, it's all digital. They don't use those sort of big machines anymore. I saw a piece in the paper, an ad for a printing museum in Penrith, outside Sydney. So I got Felicity Abbott, the designer. We jumped into the car and drove out, and there was this printing museum with the machines in working order. So, run by a bunch of old guys who'd all worked at the Sydney Morning Herald and were madly cooperative, so we filmed the printing scene there.
And what about the internal scenes of the department store?
The inside of the department store is superbly designed by Felicity Abbott and filmed at the studio in Sydney.
Beautiful.
Apart from the ground floor.
Yes, we did. The David Jones store had a seventh floor that for some reason or other they'd never restored. And they let us into the seventh floor for one day, which was the first day of the shoot. And we used that as the ground floor. So Felicity had to build a false entrance and a street behind it because it's not meant to be up in the air. So, but it looked very convincing. She did a brilliant job.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Sue, I've got a neighbour who's worked for DJs for 35 years plus, and still working there here in Brisbane. Are you getting many people reminiscing about their time with DJs in a department store like that?
I think everybody in Australia either worked for David Jones at one stage, or their mother did, or their aunt, or somebody. It's been unbelievable, the number of people who've come forward and not only loved the film, but told us their own reminiscences as well. And it's a tremendous sort of connection, really.
Were you trying to tap into that nostalgia?
Not really nostalgia, but it was sort of an inevitable byproduct, I suppose.
So you've described this as one of Bruce's best films. Why do you think that's the case? What is it about this film?
Well, I mean, Bruce is a rare filmmaker that his films always just come together as a cohesion and as a wonderful piece of cinema. This one, I think, has got it all, really. It's really beautifully directed. The performances are wonderful. And the realisation of the story is as close as you could imagine you'd want it to be. And it just works wonderfully well.
We ended up with a wonderful cast. I mean, they were fabulous. And the young girl, Angari Rice, who's only 16, did such a polished performance.
She's up and coming, isn't she? She's going to wow us.
Yeah,
in
she's
Hollywood,
in the
isn't she?
new, is it?
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man
It's
film.
supposed to be a secret. So
That'll
don't
be
tell
the end of
anyone.
it. Just, yes, don't let it get around. Just keep it to yourselves.
Now, this is the fourth feature film that you've both worked on together. Black Robe, the Fringe Dwellers, which I absolutely loved, Paradise Road as well. They're very, very different films. Is there any thread that ties these together?
Only that they're all character-driven stories, I suppose, about people in different situations. I mean, they're the sort of films really that appeal to me to make.
Yeah,
character studies.
They all have a point as well. I mean, they all have a point in they say something about the human condition, about a particular moment in time, but something that is important, I think, into our society, as well as hopefully entertaining.
With the exception of Black Road, the other films all feature women taking control in a socially constrained environment.
I guess they do, but I mean, yes, it's an interesting point, really, yeah.
Am I going too deep here, Bruce?
Definitely. I hadn't thought of that.
Over a period of 30 years, it's hard to draw a
Thought of
connection.
that. Well, Black Robe broke the mould.
It did. It did. You mentioned the women's movement earlier, Sue, the Me Too campaign. Bruce, can I ask you about that? I mean, in terms of you, what do you make of it and how it's evolved?
Came as a bit of a surprise to me, really.
Really?
I think I'm
Isn't
rather
the
naive.
casting couch famous?
I think I'm rather naive. I mean, although, I'd made a lot of films in Hollywood and all these stories came out about what's-his-name, Weinstein, I'd never heard any of them. It was all news to me.
Morgan Freeman, who was in Driving
Oh,
Miss
Morgan,
Daisy, has
more
had
stripe than Speed Gordon. Yeah.
well, he's been described as having a pattern of behaviour. Did you see anything on set?
Never. Nope. He was always an absolute gentleman. Wonderful to work with, very calm and focused, and no, I had no idea.
Isn't it, though, a symptom of this kind of behaviour that you don't see it? Those people who do these sort of things, I think, are very careful to make sure that they're not seen. And if the women aren't courageous enough to speak out, then it gets untold.
Well,
Nobody
when
knows.
you say aren't courageous enough, the power balance is not there for many to speak out. That's the problem.
That's why it's
isn't it?
courageous for them to speak up, I think.
So what do
yeah.
you make of it, Sue? What do you make of this Me Too evolution?
Well, it had to happen, and it's a good thing that it's happened, and it's a good thing that I think that men who are inclined in this way are put on notice. There's always a danger with movements that they go too far. There's a danger of ruining somebody's career, perhaps unfairly, but it's a tricky thing to talk about because you can get yourself into all sorts of trouble. Basically, I think it's a very good thing, and it's high time that it's also part of the rise of women, I think, to equality with men in the workplace, and it's in a very important stage that women now have the situation where they don't have to put up with this kind of stuff in order to pursue their careers.
Do you think it's going to change the way business is done in Hollywood, Bruce?
No. I've noticed over the last few years there's a lot more women executives at all the studios. Often all of the executives could be women. That's been the biggest change in the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay. Amanda, I didn't keep an eye on the time. How are we going? I've got a whole bunch of questions that I'd love to ask Bruce and Sue. How much
They all
time?
want to go to lunch.
Well, we want to open it up to questions to the audience as well. Another few minutes? Okay, great. I just wanted to know how we were tracking. So let's talk. I mean, we were here to talk about the relationship you two have and the collaborations that you've had. How would you describe your partnership with Bruce, Sue?
Well, mostly it's a lot of fun, except when I don't get my way.
It's important. You see, originally I approached Sue to produce, didn't I? I must have called
Fringe
you.
Dwellers, yeah.
Don McAlpine, the cameraman who shot Broken Morant and a lot of films of mine, called me one day and he said, look, I know you're having producer trouble. He said, I know someone who could produce films for you and you'd get on with and you wouldn't have any kind of organisational problems. And he said, give Sue Milliken a call. And I never met Sue. So I did. I phoned her. And I don't know, did I tell you Don had told me to call you?
No, I don't think so.
That was it anyway. So then we got together and that was how it started. Really. And then Sue is a wonderful organiser, has very good taste in films and is dead honest. You do find sometimes with producers, you can't trust them. This will come as a surprise to people, but
I wonder
you
what
can't
the
trust
producer
them.
would say about the directors.
Yes. But there are a lot of mad directors too, yeah. But it's been great because, you know, you can be sure that if Sue's organising it, everyone will be taken care of, the film will go smoothly, it'll come in on time, and all that sort of stuff.
I think films are enormously complicated because you spend a vast amount of money in a very short period of time, and nobody's ever done this film before. It's always, while the basic rules are the same, they're always different. And so it's absolutely important that everybody does their job as well as they can. And if everybody does do their job together, then you have a good time as well as working very hard. And
Yeah,
that's what I found with Bruce. Bruce does his job brilliantly, but he also communicates very well as well. So you're able to form a partnership where you can actually get the best value out of the money, which is really what you're there to do. You've got X amount of money. Get that money spent the best way you can to make the best film you can.
Yeah, and you've got to get a good crew together too, which is, you know, in Australia there's a lot of wonderful crew, a lot of cameramen, designers, composer. I mean, the beautiful score for this film done by Chris Gordon. We'd worked with before. He did Mao's Last Dancer and the Sydney documentary.
An IMAX
we
film
did,
on Sydney in the 2000, and Chris did the music. That's
That
when
was
I
another
first
one
worked
we
with
did.
him, yeah.
It was.
IMAX.
And is it important for the producer and director to share the same vision?
I think it's essential.
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, if you get a situation where the producer fundamentally wants a different film, you're sunk. This has happened to me in America once or twice, where basically they wanted something different to what I was doing. And I don't think they were even sure what it was they wanted.
I think it happened to you with an actor, wasn't it? Clint Eastwood?
Oh, with Clint. Yes, that was terrible because I was meant to
Madison
direct
County.
Mid-Brinches of Madison County, which I worked on for about 8 months. But Clint really wanted to direct it. And so he was always polite, but just massively uncooperative. And finally I had to go to the studio and I said, look, it's never going to work because he actually doesn't do anything. He just sort of stands there. And I said, you'll have to let him direct it or the film won't happen because he's not going to cooperate with me directing it. And that's what they did. He directed it.
So is it easier to make a film these days, given the technology and I guess the reduced costs, or is it harder?
Costs aren't reduced, are they?
Costs
I don't
aren't
know.
reduced. No, costs aren't reduced. I mean,
Despite the
they
technology.
haven't really rocketed up in the way that you might expect, and there's been a lot. Salaries have stayed much the same, and so on. With Australian films, I'm talking-
Salaries have gone down, Sue.
well, you mean you're talking about yourself?
That's right.
In some ways it's easier. There's the tax offset which is available for films now does help. The government agencies are very helpful. There's a process in place, but closing the gap, which is a session I talked to about yesterday. You know, there's always is the last 30%. How do you close the budget, no matter what size the budget is? There's always seems to be this gap. So I don't think it's any more difficult, but it's no easier, really. It's always
and also,
a struggle.
I think a lot of people think that because it's digital, it's easier to make it and it's faster.
Yes.
That's not true.
Right.
The lighting is just as complicated. The digital cameras have grown so that they're bigger than the old film cameras we used to have. And of course, the worst thing of all is that you can do links to all over the place. So Uncle Tom Cobley and everybody is watching the film as you're shooting it. And often for a director, it drives you mad because they come rushing in and say, could you do so-and-so, so-and-so? Because they're watching it while you're actually shooting and coming in and giving advice.
Right. There you go. Now,
Quite good, really. You can stop them doing something silly.
there's one way to look at it. Now, we are pressed for time, so we would like to open the session up to questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, if you could raise your hand.
You were saying that it was interesting the popularity that increased when the musical happened. Was there ever a conversation about making the film of the musical?
Oh, yes, there was. Someone said, so people assumed initially, I think some people did, that we were going to film the musical. But I thought the musical was terrific, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to do character studies that I really couldn't do with all those songs getting in the way.
We did actually
Although the song at the end of the film was written for us by Tim Finn, who wrote the musical.
We were actually offered the opportunity to make the film by one of the major distributors in Australia. Got Alana and I in and said, well, I don't know if you were there.
No, you did tell me.
Yeah, and they said, we'd really like to film the musical. And we all said actually no, we don't want it. We want to make the book. We want to make the musical.
See, I actually gave Tim Finn the okay to do the musical because I'm the literary executor of Madeline St John's estate, and Tim called me. This was a few years ago now, having read the novel, and said, "Oh well, I'd love to do a musical of it, but I need your okay because you're the executor." And I said, "Yes, okay, go ahead."
We got another question at the front here. We've got
How did you go about the casting?
Oh, well, the casting, we spent quite a long time doing that. I mean, we had a casting director in Sydney, Christine King, who was very au fait with all the current actors, because I really hadn't worked in Australia for 9 years, and she guided me towards a lot of the new up-and-coming actors, and that was how we got people like Ryan Corr and Rachel Taylor, and I think she also recommended Angourie Rice.
Yes, she did. She'd been watching Angourie do some of small Australian films, and she had noted her.
And then others just came about, that we wanted. Some people, what's her name? Alison McGurr sent a tape from California. She heard about the film and put herself on a cassette and sent that to us. And I thought, oh, she'd be good, for the girl whose husband disappears. And then who suggested?
Julia
Susie
Ormond.
Porter, you think?
No, Susie Porter, I think, was another good suggestion. Yeah. We'd worked with Susie before because she was in Paradise Road, which was her first film. And she's really an outstanding actress. Wonderful.
Noni Hazelhurst.
Noni too, yes. Yeah. So we did have to see a lot of people.
Another question?
Was it difficult adapting the novel to a screenplay? And if so, what was the hardest part?
It wasn't that difficult, because if you read the novel, it's written in fairly short scenes. It's not overwritten like a lot of books. A lot of books you have to adapt. They're far too long and their dialogue goes on and on and on. It was written in short takes. It moved well from person to person. And really adapting it, I think it's the closest adaptation to a novel I've ever done. Or we've ever done. Well, it's the only thing we've done together. But it is remarkably close, and there's not that much that's added. Perhaps the only scene that's added is the one at the very end. The novel ends and they say, we're going to have a party and all get together, and it stops. And I thought, well, we've got to do the party. So we added the party at the very end. And there was a few other little bits and pieces, but someone emailed me today and said, Noni Hazelhurst's wonderful speech about the, women
Clever
and, what girls can do and all this sort of thing. They said, did you write that or did Sue write that? And I said, Madeline St. John wrote it. It's in the book.
Yeah, well, the wonderful thing was that a lot of the dialogue can come straight from the book, and anybody who's read it will recognise it, I'm sure. But she just wrote this delightful dialogue that was so easy to transfer.
Right. I think we've got another question.
I think the casting is perfect, and I think that really makes the movie. Who had the final call on the casting? Is it the director, or do you, as also directors and producers, sort of do an overview on the casting?
It's the director. Actually, I found, no, they do, it really is a director. And I found, even in America doing films with a lot of high-powered producers and studios, they almost invariably let me do the casting. They'll interfere on all sorts of things, but very rarely with the casting. Once or twice I've been forced to use... Shut up, sir. Once or twice I've been forced to use an actor here or there that I thought was a mistake, but it's been quite rare. Generally, they let me do it.
The director has to have the final say, because the director has to work with the actors and get the performance. It's no point forcing somebody on a director that they don't want, because therein lies disaster.
Yes,
but
if you turn around
and
and
feel at the same, you're heading in the right direction, and sometimes you can save the director from some perhaps mistakes they might have made. If you in the nick of time. So, no, can happen.
Yeah, I mean, if you turn around and say to the producers, I can't get the performance out of that person, they'll usually say, well, we better get someone else.
We've got a question right at the back here.
My son's at university in England studying film production and cinematography, and they're still using film quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah, and I think I would say that I'm more of a purist if you use film, or because you did mention that you're working now with digital, and do you have a preference?
Well, it wouldn't matter if I did or not, because there's really no film you can use it. There's no laboratories. There's no laboratories in Australia anymore. I don't think there's any in America. There's probably some somewhere in the world, but really you have to do it digitally. And if you did find a lab somewhere that could process film, it would be phenomenally expensive. It's all gone digital. I don't mind that. That doesn't worry me. I mean, it doesn't. All the digital techniques don't. None of the digital gizmos can write scripts or direct actors. I mean, basically nothing's changed.
We've got one final question just here in the back, the lady.
Bruce, I was interested. First, thank you both for your body of work. It's beautiful. But I was interested, earlier you said that no, going digital hasn't made anything less expensive. My question is, where has that money, I'm assuming that the line items just move around on the spreadsheet to a different line and nothing much changes, but what might have happened that saved the money from film processing and film stock and all of, like, where's all that money gone? Where's it moved to?
Well, you've saved money. It's true, you don't have to process the film anymore. But the whole digital thing is really quite costly, because you've got to have someone on the set who guides who's doing all the technical work, because what you're shooting is really just a kind of flat image. You have to have someone there who all the time, who's there full time, making sure that all the details are right, the colours are right, the amount of pixels is correct. 100 little technical things are done that when you had film you didn't have to worry about. And then at the end of it too, you've still got all of the business of digitising all the material, feeding it all into editing machines, keeping copies of it all. It's all very expensive. And it probably makes up for the cost of the laboratory.
Well, on that note...
I mean, you can make films quite simply if you're at a film school or something and you've got a little camera like that one, or even smaller. You can make a film and you will get an image and something will come out of it. And people have actually done very good films, like, You know, I've seen a film shot on an iPhone that won awards a few years ago, and it was well done. But I saw an interview with the director who said, I'll never do that again. Really, to do them properly, the equipment is complex and quite cumbersome.
On that note, we might wrap up our conversation.
Okay.
It's been very interesting. Thank you very, very much. Please join me in thanking them.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.